The dust-laden wind carried whispers of a new arrival in Abilene, Kansas, as Faith Taylor stood on the weathered porch of her small homestead, squinting against the setting sun of 1878. Her calloused hands gripped the railing while her two young boys played in the yard, oblivious to the financial worries that had been keeping their mother awake for weeks. The 5-acre property that had once represented her dreams now threatened to become her undoing, abandoned by a husband who had found gold fever more alluring than family responsibility. Matthew, Samuel. "Time to come inside," she called to her sons, aged 4 and 6, her voice carrying across the open space as a lone rider appeared on the horizon. Faith watched with cautious interest as the stranger approached, his broad-shouldered silhouette growing larger against the amber sky. She ushered her boys inside, instructing them to wash up for dinner while she stepped back onto the porch, shotgun discreetly positioned behind the door if needed. The rider pulled his chestnut mare to a stop at her fence line, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. Beneath the layer of trail dust, she could make out a handsome face framed by dark hair and a closely trimmed beard. His eyes, the color of a summer storm, met hers with unexpected kindness. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice carrying a gentle timbre despite its depth. "Name's Isaiah Vaughn. I'm looking for work in these parts. Town folks mentioned you might need help with your property." Faith straightened her spine, pride rising within her despite her desperate circumstances. Did they now? The good people of Abilene seem mighty concerned with my business these days. A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "No disrespect intended. I've got strong hands and know my way around a ranch. Been working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas for years." Faith considered him silently. The barn roof needed fixing before winter. The fence line had 3 sections down, and the small herd of cattle required attention she couldn't provide while also caring for her boys and tending to their vegetable garden. Every day brought new worries about how she would keep this place running alone. "I can't offer much in the way of payment," she admitted reluctantly. "My husband." She paused, the familiar bitterness rising in her throat. "He left me with 2 boys and more work than I can manage 6 months back." Headed to California with dreams of striking it rich. Something shifted in Isaiah's expression, not pity, which she would have despised, but a quiet understanding. "I don't need much, madam. A place to sleep and meals would do for now." Before she could respond, little Samuel burst through the door, his face lighting up at the sight of the visitor. "Mama, is he a real cowboy? Does he have a gun? Can I see his horse? Samuel Taylor, where are your manners?" Faith scolded gently, but Isaiah was already dismounting, leading his mare closer to the fence where the boy could see. "This here's Sadie," he told Samuel, who stared wide-eyed at the magnificent animal. "Best cow horse in 3 counties. Would you like to help me brush her down?" Matthew appeared behind his brother, more reserved but equally curious. "Do you fight Indians?" he asked seriously. Isaiah shook his head. "No, son. Most native folks I've met just want to live in peace, same as anyone else." Faith felt something unexpected uncoil within her chest at his response. She'd heard too many men boast of conflicts that seemed more fiction than fact. "You boys go back inside and finish setting the table," she instructed. "Mr. Vaughn and I have business to discuss." When they disappeared inside, Faith turned back to the cowboy. "There's a small cabin behind the barn. It's not much, but it's yours if you want the job. We can discuss proper wages once I see your work." "That's fair," Isaiah nodded. "I appreciate the opportunity, Mrs. Taylor." "Miss," she corrected automatically. "I'm not using his name anymore." Something flickered in Isaiah's eyes that she couldn't quite read. "Miss Taylor, then. I'll get settled and start at first light if that suits you." As she watched him lead his horse toward the barn, Faith couldn't help but wonder if she was making a mistake trusting a stranger with her property and bringing him so close to her children. But the alternative, losing everything she and her boys had left, seemed far worse. "1 week," she murmured to herself. "We'll see what kind of man Isaiah Vaughn really is in 1 week." The next morning arrived with golden light streaming through the windows of Faith's modest home. She had risen before dawn, as was her custom, to prepare breakfast and plan the day's work. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon filled the small kitchen as she heard footsteps on the porch. A soft knock followed. Isaiah stood in the doorway, hat in hand, already looking as though he'd been working for hours. "Morning, Miss Taylor. Thought I'd check what you need done first before getting too far along." Faith nodded approvingly at his initiative. Breakfast first, no sense working on an empty stomach. She gestured to the table where plates were already set. "Much obliged," he said, taking the offered seat only after she'd called the boys to the table and settled them with their food. As they ate, Faith outlined the most pressing needs of the property. Isaiah listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about the cattle, the condition of the well, and the state of her equipment. He seemed genuinely knowledgeable, easing some of her concerns. "The roof needs to be our first priority," he suggested. "I noticed some water damage in the barn. With fall coming on, we need to get that fixed before the rains." Faith appreciated that he didn't try to take over completely or dismiss her opinions as many men might have. Instead, he offered suggestions while respecting that this was her property. After breakfast, the boys trailed after Isaiah like eager puppies as he inspected the barn. Faith watched from a distance as he patiently answered their endless questions, even letting Matthew hold his hat while he examined the roof beams. By midday, Isaiah had already replaced 2 broken fence posts and was hauling lumber from town for the barn repairs. Faith brought him water as he worked, struck by his efficient movements and the careful way he conserved his energy in the growing heat. "You've done this before," she observed. Isaiah paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yes, madam. My pa had a small spread in Texas, learned everything from him before I took to the trail." "What made you leave?" she asked, curious despite her usual reserve. A shadow passed over his features. "War changed things. When I came back, the land didn't feel the same." He didn't elaborate further, and Faith didn't press. She understood that some memories were better left undisturbed. The days fell into a rhythm. Isaiah would be up before dawn, tending to the animals and starting on the day's tasks before Faith even had breakfast ready. The boys quickly became attached to him, especially Samuel, who would race outside each morning calling Isaiah's name. One evening, after the boys were asleep, Faith sat on the porch mending clothes by lantern light. Isaiah approached from the barn, his day's work complete. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. Faith nodded, suddenly aware of how rarely she had adult company these days. The boys couldn't stop talking about how you let them help with the calves today. Isaiah smiled, the expression transforming his weather-worn face. "They're good boys. Smart, too. Matthew has a real way with animals." "His father never noticed," Faith said quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Isaiah was silent for a moment. Some men don't recognize value when it's right in front of them. The simple statement held no judgment, yet Faith felt tears threatening. She blinked them away quickly, focusing on her stitching. "Why did you really come here, Mr. Vaughn? Surely a man with your skills could find better paying work." Isaiah considered her question carefully. "I've been moving from place to place for years. Riding with cattle drives, taking odd jobs, started feeling like I was just drifting without purpose." He looked out at the darkened landscape. "Something about this place felt right when I rode in. Can't explain it better than that." Faith studied his profile in the dim light, wondering what experiences had carved the lines around his eyes. He couldn't be much older than her 26 years, perhaps 30 at most, yet there was a depth to him that spoke of having seen more of life's hardships than most. "Well, I'm grateful you chose to stop here," she admitted. "The boys," she hesitated, "they need to see what a hard-working man looks like." Their eyes met briefly in the lantern light, and something unspoken passed between them, a mutual recognition of respect that neither had expected to find. As autumn progressed, Isaiah became an integral part of their daily life. The barn roof was repaired, the fence line restored, and the small herd of cattle properly tended. He built new shelves in Faith's kitchen and fixed the squeaky floorboard that had annoyed her for months. One crisp October morning, Faith watched from the window as Isaiah taught Matthew how to properly groom a horse, his large hands guiding the boy's smaller ones with gentle patience. Samuel sat atop the corral fence, swinging his legs and peppering them with questions. A lump formed in her throat. This was what her boys had been missing, not just a man's presence, but this particular kind of steady, reliable strength. Isaiah never raised his voice, never showed frustration with their constant curiosity, never made promises he didn't keep. Later that day, as Faith hung laundry on the line, she caught sight of Isaiah coming from town earlier than expected, riding hard. "What is it?" she called as he approached, her heart quickening with alarm. "Telegram came for you," he said, dismounting quickly and handing her a folded paper. Station master said it seemed important. Faith took the telegram with trembling fingers, opening it to read the brief message. "Frank Taylor died, Sacramento, stop mining accident, stop no funds recovered, stop funeral completed, stop." The paper fluttered from her fingers as the world tilted around her. Not grief, she had mourned the loss of the man she married long ago, but shock at the finality of it, and the complicated emotions that accompanied the news. Isaiah's steady hands caught her elbows as she swayed. "Faith, what's happened?" "He's dead," she whispered, looking up into Isaiah's concerned face. "Frank is dead, mining accident in California." Isaiah guided her gently to the porch steps, sitting beside her as she stared blankly at the horizon. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Faith shook her head slowly. "I don't know what to feel. He abandoned us. Left me with 2 boys to raise alone with a property I could barely manage," her voice caught. "And yet he was their father. How do I tell them?" Isaiah remained silent, offering his presence rather than empty words. "The boys," she continued, "they barely mention him anymore. Samuel probably won't even remember him in a few years." She looked down at her hands. "What kind of man leaves his family like that? Not a man worthy of your tears," Isaiah said softly. "But your boys deserve to know." "They'll have questions as they grow older." Faith nodded, gathering her strength. "You're right, I should tell them tonight." She glanced at him. Would you be there? They trust you." The request seemed to catch him off guard. "Of course, if you think it would help." That evening, after a quiet dinner, Faith gathered her sons in the small sitting room. With Isaiah's reassuring presence nearby, she explained as gently as she could that their father had died while looking for gold. Matthew's face remained solemn, his eyes darting between his mother and Isaiah as he processed the news. Samuel, too young to fully comprehend, asked innocently, "Does that mean he's never coming home?" "That's right, sweetheart," Faith answered, pulling him onto her lap. "He won't be coming back." "But we don't need him anyway," Samuel declared with the simple logic of a 4-year-old. "We have Isaiah now." Faith's eyes flew to Isaiah's face, catching a flash of emotion before he carefully composed his features. "Isaiah is helping us with the ranch," Faith explained carefully. "That's different from being your father." Matthew, always more perceptive, studied Isaiah intently. "But you're not leaving, are you?" The question hung in the air, weighted with more significance than the boy could understand. Isaiah knelt down to Matthew's level, his voice gentle but serious. "I promise to help your ma get this place running right, and I keep my promises. I'll be here as long as you all need me." The words, though directed at Matthew, seemed to reach into Faith's very core. As she met Isaiah's steady gaze over her son's head, she realized how much she had come to depend on not just his labor but his unwavering presence in their lives. Later, after the boys were asleep, Faith found Isaiah on the porch, staring at the star-filled sky. She wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill and joined him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being there tonight." Isaiah nodded, his profile strong against the darkness. "Those are good boys. They deserve better than what life's handed them so far." "They've taken to you," Faith observed quietly. "More than I expected." A smile touched his lips. "They make it easy. Samuel reminds me of myself at that age, full of questions and not enough patience for the answers." Faith laughed softly. "And Matthew watches everything, says little, but misses nothing." They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only develops between people who have found unexpected harmony in each other's company. "Winter will be here soon," Isaiah remarked, changing the subject. "We should think about slaughtering that older steer before the first snow. Meat will keep better in the cold." Faith nodded, grateful for his practical foresight. "I've been putting some money aside from the milk and cheese sales." Maybe we can afford to get Matthew those new boots he needs before winter sets in. We, Isaiah questioned gently. Faith felt heat rise to her cheeks, realizing how naturally the word had come to her lips. I just meant I know what you meant, Isaiah said, his voice carrying no judgment. It's good, Faith. This place is starting to thrive again. You should be proud. In the months since Isaiah's arrival, the small homestead had indeed begun to recover. The vegetable garden had yielded a bountiful harvest under his care. The cattle were healthy, and he had even helped Faith establish a small egg business with the chickens, bringing in steady income each week from town. I couldn't have done it without you, she admitted, her usual self-reliance giving way to honest gratitude. Isaiah turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the dim light. Yes, you could have. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Faith Taylor, don't forget that. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that the boundaries of employer and employee had blurred into something neither of them had anticipated. Faith stood abruptly, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how intimate their conversation had become. It's getting late. I should check on the boys. Isaiah rose as well, respectful of her retreat. Of course. Good night, Faith. As she walked back to the house, Faith felt his gaze following her, and with it came a realization that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. Isaiah Vaughn had become essential to her in ways that went far beyond his work on the ranch. The first snow of winter arrived in late November, blanketing the Kansas plains in pristine white. The boys were ecstatic, racing outside at first light to make tracks in the fresh powder. Faith watched from the doorway, her heart lighter than it had been in years despite the challenges winter would bring. Isaiah emerged from the barn, carrying a bundle of firewood. Looks like they're enjoying the snow, he observed, smiling at the boys' antics. They've been waiting for it since you told them about building snow forts last week, Faith replied, taking some of the wood from his arms as he approached. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Faith found herself unable to look away from his face. In the crisp morning light, the contours of his features seemed sharper, more defined the straight line of his nose, the curve of his mouth, the intensity of his eyes as they met hers. The moment was broken by a snowball that hit Isaiah squarely in the back, followed by Samuel's delighted giggle. Oh, you've done it now, young man, Isaiah called, setting down the wood and scooping up a handful of snow. This means war, Faith laughed as her normally dignified cowboy chased her sons around the yard, all three of them shouting and laughing as they engaged in a spirited snowball fight. She couldn't remember the last time the homestead had been filled with such joyful sounds. Later that evening, after a hearty stew that Isaiah had helped prepare, Faith sat at the kitchen table reviewing their finances. The additional income from the eggs and cheese had helped, but winter would be lean. Isaiah joined her, bringing 2 cups of coffee. How does it look? He asked, nodding toward her calculations. Faith sighed. Better than last year, but still tight. The property taxes are due after Christmas, and Matthew has outgrown nearly everything. Isaiah hesitated, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small leather pouch. I've been saving most of what you've paid me, he said, placing it on the table. I want you to have it for the taxes. Faith stared at the pouch, then back at him. Isaiah, no, that's your money, you've earned it, and I've had a roof over my head and good food in my belly because of you, he countered. I don't need much, Faith, let me do this. The sincerity in his eyes made it impossible to refuse without hurting him. It would be a loan, she insisted, to be repaid in the spring when we sell the calves. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. If that makes it easier for you to accept, then yes, it's a loan. They both knew he would never ask for the money back. As December progressed, the days grew shorter and colder. Isaiah moved his bedroll into the barn to be closer to the animals, despite Faith's concerns about the cold. He fashioned a small stove from spare parts to keep the space warm enough, assuring her he had slept in far worse conditions during his trail riding days. One evening, a week before Christmas, Faith sat by the fire mending clothes while the boys played with wooden animals Isaiah had carved for them. A sudden gust rattled the windows as the wind picked up outside. Storms coming, Isaiah observed from where he was repairing one of Matthew's boots at the table. Might be a bad one. Faith glanced at him, concern etching her features. The barn isn't insulated well enough for a blizzard. You should stay in the house tonight. The offer hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. I'll be fine in the barn, Isaiah said gently. I've weathered many storms. Don't be stubborn, Faith replied, her voice firmer than intended. The boys' room has space for a pallet, or you can take the sofa here. I won't have you freezing to death on my property, Isaiah Vaughn. A smile touched his lips at her determined tone. Yes, madam. The storm arrived with full fury shortly after the boys were tucked in bed. Wind howled around the small house, driving snow against the windows with frightening force. Faith added wood to the fire while Isaiah made a final check on the animals, returning with snow crusting his coat and hat. Everything's secure, he reported, stomping his boots and hanging his wet outerwear by the fire. The cattle are huddled together in the back of the barn where it's warmest. Faith handed him a cup of hot coffee, their fingers touching briefly during the exchange. Thank you for checking. I was worried. They sat together before the fire, listening to the storm rage outside while enjoying the rare quiet moment without the boys' constant energy. Faith found herself studying Isaiah's profile in the firelight, noting how at ease he seemed in her home, as if he had always belonged there. What are you thinking? He asked softly, catching her gaze. Faith considered deflecting the question but found herself answering honestly instead. I was thinking how different this winter is from the last, how much has changed since you arrived. Isaiah turned to face her fully. Good changes, I hope. Very good, she admitted, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire and howling wind. The boys are happier, the farm is thriving, and she hesitated, gathering her courage. I feel less alone. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a revealing of what he usually kept carefully guarded. Faith, he began, then paused as if weighing his words carefully. I came here looking for work, not expecting to find whatever this is becoming between us. Faith's heart beat faster at his directness. And what do you think this is becoming? Isaiah set his cup aside and moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Something I never thought I'd find again, something worth staying for. The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Faith realized with sudden clarity that she had been holding part of herself back, afraid to trust again after Frank's betrayal. I'm scared, she whispered. Not of you, but of what happens if I let myself depend on someone again. Isaiah reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. I'm not Frank. I don't make promises lightly. When I give my word, I keep it. Faith looked down at their joined hands, his large and work roughened, her smaller but equally calloused from years of labor. The boys adore you, and I've grown to love them as if they were my own, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. But it's their mother who has truly captured my heart. Faith's eyes widened at the declaration, so plainly stated yet profound in its simplicity. Before she could respond, a particularly violent gust shook the house, sending a shower of sparks up from the fire. The moment was broken as they both jumped up to ensure no embers had escaped the fireplace. Crisis averted, they found themselves standing close, the tension of their interrupted conversation still crackling between them like the fire at their backs. It's late, Faith said reluctantly. We should get some rest. Isaiah nodded, though his eyes conveyed everything left unsaid. Good night, Faith. As she lay in bed listening to the storm, Faith reflected on how Isaiah had become the center of their small world not by demanding attention or asserting authority, but through consistent kindness, unwavering reliability, and genuine affection for her sons. The revelation of his deeper feelings shouldn't have surprised her, yet it had left her breathless with possibility. Morning brought a transformed landscape, brilliant white and pristine under a clear blue sky. The storm had left nearly 2 feet of snow, effectively isolating the homestead from town until paths could be cleared. Faith found Isaiah already up, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. He smiled when he saw her, no trace of awkwardness despite their conversation the night before. The boys will be excited, he observed, nodding toward the window where the snow drifts rose halfway up the glass, As if on cue, Samuel came bounding into the room, still in his nightshirt. His eyes grew wide at the sight of Isaiah. "You stayed in our house." Isaiah chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "The storm was too fierce for the barn, little man. Your ma was kind enough to let me stay warm." Matthew appeared more sedately, though his excitement about the snow was evident in his hurried approach to the window. "Can we build a snow fort today?" "Like you promised," after chores, Faith interjected, moving to the stove to begin breakfast. "Animals need tending first, especially after a storm." The day unfolded in a pleasant rhythm of necessary work and play. Isaiah and Faith cleared paths to the barn and wellhouse while the boys helped feed the chickens. After the essential tasks were complete, Isaiah made good on his promise, helping the boys construct an elaborate snow fort that soon became the site of an enthusiastic snowball battle. Faith watched from the porch as Isaiah allowed himself to be defeated by her sons, falling dramatically into a snowbank as they cheered their victory. The sight of this strong, capable man willingly making himself vulnerable for her children's joy touched something deep within her. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Faith found Isaiah examining a broken chair in the kitchen. "I've been meaning to fix this leg for weeks," he explained, glancing up as she entered. "Thought I'd take care of it while I have the time." Faith watched him work, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "You're always fixing things," she observed. Isaiah paused, looking up at her with a half smile. "I like making things right again, giving them back their purpose." The words held meaning beyond the simple repair, and they both knew it. Faith moved closer, gathering her courage. "About what you said last night," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've been thinking about it all day." Isaiah set his tools aside, giving her his full attention. And I realized that I've been holding back out of fear, not wisdom." She met his gaze directly. "You've proven yourself in every way that matters, Isaiah. Not just with the work you've done here, but with your kindness, your integrity, your devotion to my sons." Hope kindled in his eyes, though he remained still, letting her find her way to what she needed to say. "I don't know what the future holds," Faith continued, "but I do know that I trust you." And that's something I didn't think I'd ever say to a man again. Isaiah stood slowly, closing the distance between them. "Trust is a good beginning," he said softly. "The rest can come in its own time." When he reached for her hand, Faith gave it willingly, allowing herself to be drawn closer until they stood mere inches apart. The warmth of his proximity sent a tremor through her that had nothing to do with fear. "May I?" he asked, his free hand hovering near her cheek, seeking permission. Faith nodded, her breath catching as his palm cupped her face with exquisite gentleness. His calloused thumb traced the line of her cheekbone as if memorizing its contour. "I've wanted to do this since the first week I was here," he confessed, his voice a low rumble that she felt as much as heard. When his lips met hers, Faith closed her eyes, surrendering to the sweetness of the moment. The kiss was tender, reverent even, yet beneath its gentleness lay a current of restrained passion that promised depth still to be explored. Isaiah drew back first, his eyes searching hers. What he saw there must have reassured him, for a slow smile spread across his features, not the reserved expression she was accustomed to, but something radiant and unguarded. "Faith Taylor," he murmured, "I believe you may have just changed everything." She laughed softly, feeling lighter than she had in years. "For the better, I hope." His answer was another kiss, this one less hesitant than the first. Faith allowed herself to melt into his embrace, her arms encircling his neck as she rose on tiptoe to meet him more fully. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably finish fixing that chair," he said with a hint of reluctance. Faith smiled, appreciating his practicality even in this moment. "Yes, we should. There will be time for other things." As they worked together to repair the chair, their hands occasionally brushing, Faith marveled at how natural it felt, this new dimension to their relationship. Nothing dramatic had changed in their outward circumstances, yet everything felt different, illuminated by the acknowledgement of feelings too long unspoken. Christmas arrived with a flurry of simple preparations. Faith had saved carefully to ensure small gifts for her boys. While Isaiah surprised everyone by producing hand-carved toys, he had been working on secretly for weeks a detailed horse and rider for Samuel, and a miniature-covered wagon for Matthew, complete with tiny oxen. "When did you find time to make these?" Faith asked in amazement as the boys exclaimed over their treasures. Isaiah shrugged, his eyes bright with pleasure at their reaction. "Had to have some secrets, didn't I? Worked on them at night after you all were asleep." For Faith, he had crafted a delicate wooden box with an intricate pattern of leaves and vines on the lid. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Open it," he urged gently. Inside, nestled on a scrap of soft fabric, lay a simple silver ring with a small turquoise stone. Faith's eyes flew to his, questioning. "It was my mother's," Isaiah explained quietly. "Not fancy but honest like she was." Faith understood the significance of such a gift, not just the ring itself, but the piece of his past he was sharing with her. "Isaiah, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything yet," he assured her, his voice pitched low so the boys wouldn't overhear as they played with their new toys. "It's not a proposal, not exactly, more of a promise from me to you. That I'm not going anywhere, that what we're building here matters to me more than anything has in a long time." Faith closed her hand around the ring, deeply moved by his thoughtfulness. She had gotten him only practical things: a new shirt, woolen socks she had knitted during evenings by the fire, a leather-bound journal to replace the tattered one he carried. "I have something for you too," she said, retrieving a small package from beneath the modest tree they had decorated with dried berries and popcorn strings. Isaiah unwrapped it carefully, his expression softening as he saw the journal. "How did you know I needed a new one?" "I notice things," Faith said simply, "just as you do." The look that passed between them spoke volumes that couldn't be expressed in front of the children. Later, Faith knew they would have time to talk more openly. That evening, after a festive meal of roast chicken and the boys were finally asleep, exhausted from the day's excitement, Faith and Isaiah sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned comfortably against him. "This has been the best Christmas I can remember," she admitted, watching the flames dance. "Certainly the best since the boys were born." Isaiah pressed a kiss to her temple. "First of many, if I have any say in it." Faith turned to face him, reaching into her pocket to withdraw the ring he had given her earlier. She held it out to him, enjoying the momentary confusion in his eyes before she extended her left hand. "I'd like to wear it," she said softly, "if the offer still stands." Isaiah's face transformed with joy as he took the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant to be there all along. "It's not an official engagement," Faith clarified, though her heart raced at the thought, "but a promise returned. That I'm open to whatever future we might build together." Isaiah drew her close, his kiss conveying everything words could not: tenderness, passion, and the solid foundation of respect that had developed between them over these months. "That's more than enough for now," he assured her when they parted. "We have time to figure out the rest." As winter gradually released its grip on the Kansas prairie, Faith and Isaiah settled into a new rhythm. To the boys, little seemed to have changed. Isaiah was still a constant, reassuring presence, teaching them about the ranch and entertaining them with stories in the evenings. But in private moments, shared glances across the room, and increasingly frequent touches, a deeper bond was forming between Faith and the cowboy who had ridden into their lives. By March, the snow had melted enough to make the trip into Abilene for supplies. Faith decided to accompany Isaiah, leaving the boys with Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor whose farm lay 2 miles down the road. The journey into town marked Faith's first significant outing in months. She found herself unexpectedly nervous as they approached the bustle of Abilene, suddenly aware of how her appearance would be scrutinized by the townsfolk. "You look beautiful," Isaiah assured her, seeming to read her thoughts as they rode side by side. "Though I'd prefer if old Wilkins at the general store didn't notice quite how beautiful." Faith laughed, appreciating his attempt to lighten her mood. "Jealous, Mr. Vaughn," cautiously possessive, he corrected with a wink. "There's a difference." The distinction warmed her more than she expected. Frank had been jealous in the worst way, suspicious and controlling without ever showing the devotion that might have made her feel truly valued. Their arrival in town did indeed cause some heads to turn. Faith was well aware that rumors had likely been circulating about her and the handsome cowboy who had taken up residence at her homestead. The ring on her finger, though not technically an engagement band, would certainly fuel further speculation. At the general store, Mr. Wilkins greeted them with poorly disguised curiosity. "Mrs. Taylor, good to see you in town, been a while." "Miss Taylor," she corrected reflexively, though the title felt increasingly temporary in her mind. Isaiah stood respectfully at her side as she handed over her list of supplies, his presence solid and reassuring without being overbearing. Faith noticed how Wilkins addressed most of his comments to Isaiah rather than to her, despite the fact that she was the one making the purchases. "The lady is handling the transaction, Mr. Wilkins," Isaiah said mildly when the shopkeeper directed a question about payment to him. "Best direct your inquiries her way." Faith shot him a grateful look as Wilkins reddened slightly and adjusted his approach. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it spoke volumes about the kind of partnership Isaiah envisioned between them, one of equals, each respected for their contributions. As they were loading their purchases onto the wagon, Sheriff Coleman approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Isaiah Vaughn, I thought that was you," he said, extending his hand. "Haven't seen you since that trouble with the cattle rustlers 2 years back." Isaiah shook the offered hand warmly. "Sheriff Coleman, good to see you're still keeping the peace in Abilene." "Trying to," the older man agreed before turning to Faith. "Miss Taylor, I see you've got yourself a good man here. Vaughn tracked those rustlers halfway across Kansas when nobody else could find their trail, saved a lot of cattle and probably some lives too." Faith glanced at Isaiah, who looked somewhat uncomfortable with the praise. "He's been invaluable to us," she acknowledged, though he failed to mention his heroics. "Not heroics, just doing what needed doing," Isaiah demurred. "How's your daughter, Sheriff? Must be nearly grown now." As the men continued their conversation, Faith reflected on how little she still knew of Isaiah's past. He spoke rarely of his years on the trail, sharing only occasional stories with the boys about the places he'd seen. She realized there were depths to him she had yet to explore, experiences that had shaped him into the man she was coming to love. Their journey home was companionable, the wagon loaded with supplies that would last them through spring. As they traveled the familiar road, Faith broke the comfortable silence. "Why didn't you tell me about the rustlers?" Isaiah glanced at her, then returned his attention to the horses. "Didn't seem important, it was just a job." The sheriff seemed to think it was more than that. Isaiah was quiet for a moment, considering. It was a bad business. Those men had killed a rancher and his son before stealing the herd. Finding them meant something to me, justice for that family. The simple explanation revealed more about Isaiah's character than a longer story might have. Faith reached across the wagon seat to place her hand on his arm. "Thank you for telling me. I want to know these things about you, the parts that made you who you are." His expression softened as he covered her hand with his own. "There's time for all that. Some stories are better told slowly." As they approached the homestead, Faith felt a surge of contentment at the sight of the small house and barn, smoke curling from the chimney where Mrs. Henderson had maintained the fire in their absence. This place that had once represented such struggle now felt like the center of a promising future. Spring brought renewed activity to the ranch. The vegetable garden needed planting, fences required mending after winter's assault, and 2 new calves joined their small herd. Faith and Isaiah worked side by side through the busy days, their partnership deepening with each shared task. The boys thrived under this new arrangement. Matthew, always the more reserved of the two, began to come out of his shell under Isaiah's patient guidance. Samuel's natural exuberance found constructive outlets as Isaiah taught him to help with age-appropriate chores around the farm. One warm evening in late April, as the boys chased fireflies in the yard, Isaiah pulled Faith aside, his expression unusually serious. "I've been thinking," he began, taking her hands in his. "About us, about the future." Faith felt a flutter of anticipation. "What about it?" I want to do this properly, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. I want to ask you to marry me, Faith. Not just because it makes sense for the ranch or for the boys, but because I've fallen in love with you more deeply than I ever thought possible. Though they had been moving steadily toward this moment for months, the directness of his words still took Faith's breath away. Isaiah. Let me finish, he said gently. I know what Frank did to you the way he left, the broken promises. I know you're cautious about trusting again, and you have every right to be. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I can't promise that life will always be easy. Ranching is hard work, and there will be lean years along with good ones. But I can promise that you'll never face those challenges alone. That I'll be beside you, working just as hard, carrying just as much of the load. That your boys will always know they can count on me. Faith felt tears gathering in her eyes, moved by the sincerity in his voice and the steady devotion that had characterized every day of their relationship. The boys, she said softly, they need stability more than anything. Isaiah nodded, understanding her primary concern had always been her son's well-being. They need a father who will stay, who will teach them, protect them, love them. I want to be that for them, Faith, if you'll let me. Faith looked over at her sons, now sprawled in the grass, counting their captured fireflies. In the fading light, she could see how much they had grown since Isaiah's arrival, not just physically taller, but more confident, more joyful. They already see you that way, she admitted, turning back to Isaiah. Samuel asked me last week why you don't have the same last name as us. A smile touched Isaiah's lips. Smart boy, what did you tell him? That names are complicated, Faith replied with a small laugh. He didn't find that very satisfying. Isaiah's expression grew serious again. Faith Taylor, will you marry me? Let me give those boys my name and spend the rest of my life giving you all the happiness you deserve. Faith's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at this man who had restored not just her homestead, but her faith in the possibility of love. Yes, she whispered, her voice strengthening as she repeated, yes, I will marry you, Isaiah Vaughn. Joy transformed his features as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. Faith laughed as he spun her around once, before setting her gently back on the ground and claiming her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of devotion. Their moment was interrupted by small voices calling from the yard. Mama, Isaiah, look how many fireflies we caught. Isaiah kept his arm around Faith's waist as they turned to face the boys. I think we should tell them, he murmured against her hair. Faith nodded, suddenly eager to share their happiness. Boys, come here a minute. We have something important to tell you. Matthew and Samuel approached, their jar of fireflies glowing softly in the gathering dusk. Faith knelt down to their level, Isaiah joining her on one knee. Isaiah has asked me to marry him, she explained, watching their faces carefully. And I've said yes. That means he would be your father and we would all be a family together. Samuel's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Really, forever and ever, will we have the same last name now? Yes, little man, Isaiah confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. You'd be Samuel Vaughn. How does that sound? I like it, Samuel declared, throwing his arms around Isaiah's neck with unrestrained joy. Matthew remained quiet, his expression thoughtful as he processed this significant change. Faith reached for his hand, giving him space to form his own response. Matthew, what do you think, sweetheart? Matthew looked solemnly at Isaiah. If you're our father, does that mean you'll never leave like our real father did? The question struck Faith like a physical blow, the innocent articulation of the fear that had lingered in her own heart for so long. Isaiah met the boy's gaze with equal seriousness. Matthew, I promise you that I will never choose to leave you, your brother, or your mother. Being a father isn't just about sharing the same blood, it's about being there every day, through good times and hard times. That's the kind of father I want to be for you. Matthew considered this, then nodded with the gravity of a much older child. Okay, I think I'd like being Matthew Vaughn. Isaiah opened his arm, and Matthew stepped forward to be enfolded in the family embrace. Faith felt tears of gratitude slide down her cheeks as she held her sons, and the man who had so unexpectedly become essential to all their happiness. As they stood together in the gathering twilight, the fireflies glowing around them like earthbound stars. Faith felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find again. The broken pieces of their lives were being reassembled into something stronger, more beautiful for having been through the breaking. The wedding was planned for early June, when the prairie would be dotted with wildflowers, and before the most intense heat of summer arrived. Faith was determined to keep it simple, just family, and a few friends from neighboring farms, with the ceremony performed by Reverend Phillips from the church in Abilene. As the day approached, Faith found herself caught up in unexpected nervousness. Not doubt about her decision to marry Isaiah that remained the surest thing in her heart, but a fluttering anxiety about this public declaration of their love. The evening before the wedding, after the boys were asleep and the house was quiet, Faith sat on the porch watching the stars appear. Isaiah found her there, settling beside her with the easy familiarity that had developed between them. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently, noticing her pensive mood. Faith shook her head. "Not about you, never about you," she hesitated, trying to articulate her feelings. "It's just. The last time I stood before a preacher making promises, they ended up broken. Not by me, but still broken." Isaiah took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I understand, but tomorrow isn't about the past, Faith. It's about the future we're choosing together." She smiled at his perception, leaning into his solid presence. "When I married Frank, I was a girl with romantic notions and no real understanding of what marriage meant. Now I'm a woman who knows exactly how hard life can be, how fragile promises can seem in the face of hardship." "And yet you're choosing to make those promises again," Isaiah observed. "That takes more courage than making them the first time." Faith turned to look at him, struck by the truth of his words. "I hadn't thought of it that way." "You're the bravest person I know, Faith Taylor," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Raising those boys alone, keeping this place going when most would have given up, opening your heart again after being hurt so deeply." He reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. "I don't take lightly the trust you're placing in me tomorrow. I intend to spend every day earning it." Faith leaned forward to kiss him, drawing strength from his unwavering certainty. "I love you, Isaiah Vaughn. I think perhaps I began loving you that first day when you explained to Matthew that you didn't fight Indians." Isaiah's laugh was soft in the darkness. "And here I thought it was my skill with fence posts that won you over." "That helped," Faith admitted with a smile. "Along with about 100 other things I've discovered about you since then." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars brighten against the deepening blue of the night sky. Tomorrow would bring change, official, sanctioned by church and community, but the essential truth of their commitment had been established long before. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of their union. Mrs. Henderson arrived early to help Faith prepare, bringing with her a simple but lovely white dress that her own daughter had worn for her wedding. "It would honor us if you'd wear it," the older woman insisted when Faith protested such generosity. As Faith stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, she barely recognized the woman reflected there. The dress, though modest by city standards, transformed her usual practical appearance into something softer, more feminine. Mrs. Henderson had arranged her hair with wildflowers, and a touch of color on her cheeks completed the effect. "You look beautiful, Mama," Matthew said from the doorway, his eyes wide with appreciation. Faith turned to find both her sons watching her, already dressed in their best clothes with their hair slicked down neatly. "Thank you, sweetheart. You both look very handsome." Samuel bounced with excitement. "Isaiah is waiting outside. Mr. Henderson won't let him come in because he says it's bad luck to see you before the wedding." Faith smiled at the boy's report. "That's an old tradition. Tell Isaiah I'll see him soon at the ceremony." The wedding itself was held under the large oak tree behind the house, where Isaiah had constructed simple benches for the guests. Reverend Phillips stood waiting as Faith approached on Matthew's arm, the boy having solemnly requested the honor of escorting his mother. Isaiah's face, as he watched her approach, would remain etched in Faith's memory forever, wonder, love, and profound gratitude all visible in his expression. He stood tall and handsome in a new shirt and vest, his dark hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. Samuel waited beside him, proudly holding the simple gold band that Isaiah had purchased in Abilene the week before. The small gathering of friends and neighbors beamed as Faith joined Isaiah beneath the oak's spreading branches. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Phillips began, his voice carrying across the prairie, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Faith Taylor and Isaiah Vaughn in holy matrimony." As the familiar words of the ceremony continued, Faith found herself focusing not on them but on Isaiah's steady gaze, the warmth of his hands holding hers, the presence of her sons standing close by. This, she realized, was what had been missing from her first marriage, not just love, but this sense of creating something whole and enduring together. When the time came for their vows, Isaiah spoke clearly, his voice carrying the depth of his commitment. "I, Isaiah Vaughn, take you, Faith Taylor, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live." Faith repeated the words, her voice steady despite the emotion welling in her chest. As she spoke, she felt the weight of her past falling away, replaced by the lightness of hope for their future together. When Samuel stepped forward with the ring, Isaiah knelt down to the boy's level, thanking him solemnly before turning back to Faith. As he slid the simple band onto her finger, joining it with his mother's turquoise ring, he added words that weren't part of the traditional ceremony. "With this ring, I give not just my name but my heart, my strength, and my future to you and to your sons, who I will cherish as my own from this day forward." Tears gathered in Faith's eyes at this unscripted promise. Reverend Phillips, sensing the moment's significance, placed his hand over their joined ones. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," he pronounced. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Isaiah's kiss was gentle yet affirming, appropriate for the public setting yet somehow conveying the depth of his feelings. When they parted, he kept her close, turning them both to face the boys. "Matthew, Samuel," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "come here." As the boys approached, Isaiah knelt down, bringing Faith with him so they formed a circle of four. "Today isn't just about your mother and me," he told them seriously. "It's about all of us becoming a family. I promise to be the best father I can be to you both, every day for the rest of my life." Samuel threw his arms around Isaiah's neck without hesitation. Matthew followed more slowly but with equal sincerity, and Faith encircled them all, her heart so full it felt it might overflow. Their guests broke into applause at the touching tableau, and as they rose to receive congratulations, Faith caught sight of an unexpected figure at the back of the gathering, Sheriff Coleman, who had made the journey from Abilene despite not being formally invited. The celebration continued through the afternoon, with a feast of shared dishes contributed by neighbors and music provided by Mr. Henderson's fiddle. As the sun began to set, Faith found a moment alone with Isaiah, away from the well-wishers. "Mrs. Vaughn," he murmured, drawing her close. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," she replied, savoring the newness of the name, "though I think it might take some getting used to." His smile was tender as he brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "We have all the time in the world for that." Sheriff Coleman approached them before they could continue, his expression warm as he offered his congratulations. "Didn't mean to intrude on your celebration," he explained, "but I had something I thought you might want to see, Isaiah." He handed over a folded newspaper, pointing to a small article. "Thought you should know, since it concerns the lady's previous husband." Faith tensed as Isaiah scanned the article, his expression carefully neutral. "What is it?" she asked. "It's about Frank," Isaiah explained gently. "Apparently there was more to the mining accident than we knew. The paper says he died trying to save two other miners when part of the shaft collapsed. They're calling him a hero." Faith took the paper with trembling hands, reading the brief account for herself. According to the article, Frank Taylor had indeed sacrificed himself to help others escape the cave-in, remaining behind to shore up a failing support beam while his colleagues fled to safety. I don't know what to think," Faith admitted, looking up at Isaiah. This doesn't sound like the Frank I knew. Isaiah's arm tightened around her waist. Maybe he changed, found something worth being brave for. Sheriff Coleman nodded. Thought you should know, especially for the boys' sake. Might mean something to them someday, knowing their birth father died doing something honorable. After the sheriff had moved away, Faith remained thoughtful. Should we tell them? They're so young. Not now, Isaiah advised. But someday, when they're older and asking questions about him, this will be a good thing for them to know. It doesn't change what he did to you leaving you alone, but it might help them make peace with their memories of him. Faith nodded, grateful for Isaiah's wisdom and his generosity of spirit. Many men might have resented any positive information about their predecessor, but Isaiah's concern was solely for what would benefit her sons. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing he would understand all that the words encompassed. As twilight deepened, their guests began to depart, leaving the newly formed family alone. Mrs. Henderson had offered to take the boys for the night, but Faith had declined, feeling it important that their first evening as a legal family be spent together. After putting the tired but happy boys to bed, Faith and Isaiah retreated to the porch, as they had so many evenings before. This time, however, Isaiah pulled her into his lap as they settled into the rocking chair, his arms encircling her waist as she leaned back against his chest. "Happy." He murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible," Faith answered truthfully. "When Frank left, I thought that was the end of any chance for happiness. I was just trying to survive, to keep the boys fed and the ranch going." Isaiah's hands tightened around her. "You did more than survive. You built something strong enough to welcome another person into it. That takes a special kind of courage." Faith turned in his arms to face him. "We've talked so much about what you're giving me and the boys. But I want you to know what you're getting in return, Isaiah Vaughn. A woman who will stand beside you through whatever comes, who will work just as hard as you do, who will never take your love for granted." Isaiah's eyes darkened with emotion as he cupped her face in his hands. "I believe I got the better end of this bargain, Faith Vaughn." His kiss held none of the restraint of their public wedding kiss. This was a man claiming his wife, with all the passion that had been building between them through months of growing affection and carefully maintained boundaries. Faith responded with equal fervor, finally free to express the depth of her feelings without reservation. When they broke apart, both breathless, Isaiah stood with her still in his arms. "I believe, Mrs. Vaughn, that we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." Faith laughed softly as he carried her toward the house. "I believe you're right, Mr. Vaughn." The summer and fall passed in a rhythm of work and family life that took on new sweetness under the blessing of their marriage. Isaiah formally adopted the boys, an occasion marked by a special dinner and the presentation of carved wooden boxes similar to Faith's, each containing a small token, a polished stone for Matthew that Isaiah had carried through the war for luck, and a small brass compass for Samuel. "These are man things," Isaiah explained seriously as the boys examined their gifts. "Tokens of the promise I made to be your father in every way that matters." The adoption was a formality that confirmed what had already become reality in their daily lives. Both boys now called Isaiah Pa without hesitation, and the change in their names seemed to solidify their sense of security. Winter arrived earlier than the previous year, with the first snow falling in early November. The family was well prepared, however, with a root cellar full of preserved vegetables, smoked meat hanging in the barn, and firewood stacked high against the house. On a particularly cold evening in December, as snow fell gently outside, the family gathered around the fire after dinner. Isaiah was teaching Matthew to whittle, while Samuel leaned against Faith as she read aloud from one of the books Isaiah had brought back from his last trip to Abilene. A sudden wave of dizziness caused Faith to pause mid-sentence. She closed her eyes briefly, waiting for it to pass. "Faith." Isaiah's voice held immediate concern. "Are you all right?" "Just a little light-headed," she assured him, though it was the third such episode that week. "I'm fine now." Isaiah's gaze was knowing as he studied her face. "Boys, why don't you get ready for bed?" "I'll be up to finish the story in a few minutes." Once the children had gone upstairs, Isaiah moved to sit beside Faith, taking her hands in his. How long have you been feeling unwell? Faith shrugged, reluctant to worry him. It's nothing really, just a bit tired lately. And the dizziness. The way you couldn't keep breakfast down yesterday. His tone was gentle but firm. Faith, I think you know what this might mean. A flush rose to her cheeks as she met his gaze. I thought, maybe, but it seemed too soon to say anything. I didn't want to raise hopes unnecessarily. Isaiah's expression softened into wonder. A baby, our baby, the joy in his voice dispelled Faith's last concerns about his reaction. I can't be certain yet, but yes, I think so. Probably in late spring or early summer if I'm counting correctly. Isaiah gathered her into his arms, his embrace gentle as if she had suddenly become fragile. Faith Vaughn, you continue to amaze me, he whispered against her hair. Just when I think I couldn't possibly be happier, you find a way to prove me wrong. Faith laughed softly, relaxing into his hold. We'll need to tell the boys soon. They should have time to get used to the idea of a new brother or sister. They'll be excited, Isaiah predicted, his hand moving to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. Especially Samuel, he's been asking for a baby since we married. The intimacy of the moment, Isaiah's obvious delight, and the crackling fire combined to create a perfect sense of contentment. Faith closed her eyes, savoring it. Are you happy about this? Isaiah asked after a moment, seeking confirmation. It's sooner than we planned. Faith opened her eyes to meet his concerned gaze. Completely happy, she assured him. Our family already feels so right, so complete, and yet this makes it even more so. His kiss was tender, reverent even, as if she had given him something far more precious than he deserved. When they parted, he kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. I love you, Faith, more than I have words to express. Show me then, she whispered, her eyes conveying all that remained unspoken between them. The months of Faith's pregnancy passed with a mixture of anticipation and practical preparations. Isaiah insisted on hiring help for the spring planting, unwilling to let Faith overexert herself despite her protests that pregnancy wasn't an illness. Humor me, he told her when she objected to his protectiveness. It's my first time at this. The boys responded to the news of their impending sibling with predictable differences. Samuel was immediately enthusiastic, peppering Faith with questions about the baby and when it would arrive. Matthew was more reserved, watching Faith's changing body with quiet fascination, and occasionally asking thoughtful questions about how things would be different once the baby came. One evening, Isaiah found Matthew alone in the barn, unusually subdued as he completed his chores. Something on your mind, son? Isaiah asked, sitting beside him on a hay bale. Matthew hesitated, then asked in a small voice, Will you and Mama still want me and Samuel when the new baby comes, since it will be really yours? Isaiah's heart contracted at the worry evident in the boy's expression. He placed his hands firmly on Matthew's shoulders, turning him to ensure eye contact. Matthew James Vaughn, listen to me carefully, he said, his voice gentle but absolutely serious. You and Samuel became my sons the day I married your mother. Nothing, not a new baby, not anything will ever change that. You are mine in every way that matters. Matthew studied his face, searching for reassurance. But the baby will have your blood. Isaiah nodded, acknowledging the truth. Yes, and that's a special thing. But do you know what's more special? The choice I made to be your father. Blood happens by chance, but choosing to love someone, to commit your life to them, that's a deeper kind of bond. He pulled the boy into a hug, his voice rough with emotion. I choose you, Matthew, every day. Just as I choose Samuel and your mother and this new little one. You're all my family, equally precious to me. Matthew's arms tightened around Isaiah's neck, and Isaiah felt the dampness of tears against his shirt. He held the boy for as long as he needed, silently vowing to ensure that neither of his sons ever had reason to question their place in his heart. When Matthew finally pulled back, wiping his eyes with embarrassment, Isaiah pretended not to notice. How about you help me with that new calf? I think she's almost ready to take the bottle on her own. The grateful smile that lit Matthew's face was answer enough. Spring arrived with its familiar rhythm of new life and renewed activity. Faith's pregnancy progressed well, though she chafed at the restrictions Isaiah and the local midwife placed on her activities. Her body, accustomed to constant work, rebelled against too much rest. "I'm not made of glass," she protested one afternoon as Isaiah insisted on taking over the bread making. "No, you're made of something far more precious," he countered, guiding her to a chair. "And you're carrying our child. Let me do this for you, Faith. There will be plenty of work waiting when the baby comes." She relented with a sigh, secretly enjoying the sight of her capable husband up to his elbows in flour. The boys found it hilarious, especially when he ended up with a streak of white across his forehead. As Faith's time grew nearer, a letter arrived from an unexpected source, a mining company in California. Isaiah brought it from town, his expression curious as he handed it to Faith. "It's addressed to Mrs. Frank Taylor," he noted. "Do you want me to leave while you read it?" Faith shook her head, grateful for his sensitivity but wanting him present. "No, we don't have secrets. Stay." The letter was brief but significant. The mining company, acknowledging Frank's heroic actions during the cave-in, had established a small trust for his children. It wasn't a fortune, but it would be enough to help with their education when the time came. "I never expected this," Faith said quietly, handing the letter to Isaiah after he left us with nothing. Isaiah read it through, his expression thoughtful. "It doesn't erase what he did, but it's something for the boys. A legacy that might help them understand their father better someday." Faith nodded, resting her hand on her swollen belly as the baby kicked vigorously. "Our child will know a different kind of father. One who stays, who builds rather than destroys." Isaiah's eyes darkened with emotion as he knelt beside her chair, placing his hand over hers to feel their child's movements. "I promise you that, Faith. This child and Matthew and Samuel, they will never doubt my commitment to them or to you." The baby arrived on a warm June morning after a mercifully short labor. Isaiah had paced outside the bedroom as Mrs. Henderson and the midwife attended Faith, his face pale with worry each time he heard her cry out. When at last the midwife emerged, her expression warm, Isaiah felt his knees weaken with relief. "You have a healthy son, Mr. Vaughn," she announced, "and your wife is doing just fine. You can go in now." The sight of Faith, tired but radiant, cradling their newborn son, was one Isaiah knew would remain etched in his memory forever. He approached the bed with reverence, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions. "He's perfect," Faith whispered as Isaiah perched carefully beside her. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and your chin, I think." Isaiah gently touched the baby's downy head, marveling at the tiny features. "He's beautiful, just like his mother," Faith smiled, leaning against him as he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "What shall we name him? We never did decide." Isaiah considered for a moment. "What about Joseph? After my father, Joseph Vaughn," Faith tested the name. "I like it. Strong but gentle, like the man he'll become with you to guide him." Before Isaiah could respond, a soft knock at the door announced Matthew and Samuel, their faces eager yet hesitant as they peered into the room. "Come meet your brother," Faith called softly. The boys approached carefully, their eyes wide with wonder as they gazed at the tiny bundle in Faith's arms. "He's so small," Samuel whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's hand with a single finger. "You were that small once," Isaiah told him, lifting the boy onto his lap for a better view. "And look how strong you've grown." Matthew stood beside them, studying the baby with solemn intensity. "What's his name?" "Joseph," Faith answered. "Joseph Vaughn, but we might call him Joey for short." Matthew nodded his approval. "I'll help take care of him. I can show him how to do chores when he's bigger, like Pa shows me." Isaiah's heart swelled at the simple statement and the natural way Matthew referred to him as Pa. He reached out to draw the older boy closer. "That would be a big help, son. Joey's lucky to have such good big brothers." As the family gathered around the newest Vaughn, Faith met Isaiah's gaze over the children's heads. The love that passed between them needed no words. It was a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come since that dusty day when a lone cowboy had ridden up to her fence. 5 years later, the Vaughn homestead had expanded in both size and prosperity. Through careful management and Isaiah's skilled ranching, they had been able to purchase an adjacent property, doubling their land and increasing their cattle herd substantially. The small cabin behind the barn where Isaiah had first stayed had been expanded into a bunkhouse, for the two hired hands who now helped during busy seasons. The main house had gained 2 additional rooms, one for baby Elizabeth, born 2 years after Joseph, and a larger kitchen where Faith could more easily manage meals for their growing family. On a warm autumn afternoon, Faith stood on the porch watching her children play in the yard. Matthew, now 11 and showing signs of the man he would become, was teaching 7-year-old Joseph how to throw a lasso. Samuel, 9 and perpetually energetic, was racing around with the family dog, while 3-year-old Elizabeth toddled after them, determined to keep up. Isaiah approached from the barn, his face creasing into a smile at the domestic scene before him. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" he remarked, coming to stand beside Faith. "Hard to remember when it was just you and the boys here, struggling to keep going." Faith leaned into his embrace, still feeling the same flutter in her heart when his arms encircled her. "I was thinking the same thing, how different everything is now." Indeed, the transformation went beyond the physical expansion of their property. There was a solidity to their life together, a sense of permanence that Faith had once thought beyond her reach. The lingering fear that happiness might be snatched away had gradually faded, replaced by quiet confidence in the family they had built. "Matthew's letter from school came today," she told Isaiah, referring to the correspondence course their eldest had begun through a program in Topeka. "His teacher says he has a real gift for mathematics, might make a good engineer someday." Isaiah nodded with pride. "He's got a sharp mind." The trust from Frank will help if he wants to pursue that kind of education. The mention of Frank no longer brought tension. Over the years, they had shared the truth about the boy's birth father with them gradually, appropriate to their ages, both his abandonment and his final redemptive act. Isaiah had been instrumental in helping the boys process this complex legacy, never disparaging Frank, but helping them understand that people could make both terrible and noble choices. "Samuel wants to be a rancher like you," Faith continued, watching their middle son's exuberant play. "He told me yesterday he's going to have the biggest herd in Kansas someday." Isaiah chuckled. "That sounds like our Samuel, never does anything by halves." Their conversation was interrupted as Elizabeth spotted them and came running across the yard, her dark curls bouncing with each step. "Papa." "Mama, look what I found." Isaiah scooped her up as she reached them, lifting her high before settling her on his hip. "What treasure have you discovered, princess?" She opened her small hand to reveal a perfect butterfly wing, its blue and black patterns still vivid despite being separated from its owner. "It's for Mama's collection," she announced proudly. Faith had started preserving beautiful natural objects between the pages of books years ago, inspired by Isaiah's appreciation for the prairie's subtle beauty. Elizabeth had enthusiastically joined in the hobby as soon as she was old enough to understand it. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Faith said, carefully taking the delicate wing. "We'll press it tonight before bed." As Elizabeth snuggled against Isaiah's chest, content with her parents' approval, Faith felt a familiar wave of gratitude. This man, who had ridden into their lives when she was at her lowest, had not only saved her homestead, but had helped create this tapestry of love and security that now surrounded them all. "What are you thinking about?" Isaiah asked softly, noticing her contemplative expression. Faith smiled up at him, reaching to touch his face still handsome despite the lines that years of sun and laughter had added. "I was remembering what you said to me that day, when I told you Frank had left me with 2 boys to raise alone." Isaiah's expression softened with the memory. "I believe I said something about them having my name now." "You did," Faith confirmed, "and at the time I thought you were being presumptuous." Isaiah laughed. "I was, but something about you made me want to be bold. I knew from that first day that you were someone worth staying for." Faith gestured toward their children playing in the yard, the 2 older boys now teaching Joseph how to twirl a rope, all of them laughing in the golden afternoon light. "Look what came of that boldness," she said quietly. "A family, a home, a life I never dared hope for after Frank left." Isaiah set Elizabeth down to join her brothers, then turned to pull Faith fully into his arms. "Best decision I ever made, stopping at your fence that day." Faith rose on tiptoe to kiss him, still feeling the same spark that had surprised her the first time their lips had met. I love you, Isaiah Vaughn, more with each passing day. His eyes, the same storm gray that had captured her attention years ago, crinkled at the corners as he smiled down at her. And I love you, Faith Vaughn, today and all the days to come. As they stood together, watching their children play in the fading light, Faith reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From abandoned wife struggling to survive, to beloved partner in a thriving ranch and family. From solitary cowboy drifting without purpose, to devoted husband and father building a legacy for future generations. It had begun with a simple declaration, "Then they'll have my name now," spoken by a man willing to claim not just land and livelihood, but the hearts of a woman and her sons who had been left behind. That promise, unlike so many others Faith had heard in her life, had been kept in ways more profound than either of them could have imagined on that dusty Kansas afternoon. And as the sun set over their expanded homestead, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Faith knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where they were all meant to be together, under the vast prairie sky, their shared name a testament to the family they had created through choice, commitment, and enduring love.